So 2.1 respiratory responses to exercise. This is the unit of physiology. So ventilation is the volume of air that is inspired per breath. This is found by multiplying breathing rate, which is how many breaths per minute, with tidal volume, which is the volume of air breathed in per minute. And this equation is shown here. Ventilation values are therefore determined by these two values. It will change if either tidal volume or breathing rate changes. Either of these two variants can change due to a high demand for oxygen in the body that comes during exercise. A typical value for tidal volume at rest is 500 milliliters, breathing rate 15 breaths per minute, ventilation 6 liters, and you can see these normative values for each level of exercise here. The demand for oxygen that is caused by exercise at different intensities causes these values to change, and therefore ventilation to change, as shown here. So again, we did these two same tests. We did the multi-stage fitness test, and in the multi-stage fitness test, as the intensity of the levels increased, the breathing rate increased, as you can see here. Before exercise began, there was an anticipatory rise in the breathing rate, as shown here between rest and pre-test. This sort of happens as our body begins to prepare us for the exercise, as adrenaline starts kicking and that sort of thing. Then at level 2, which is a lower intensity, the breathing rate was 28 breaths per minute, whereas at level 8, which is a much higher intensity, the breathing rate was 40 breaths per minute. This is due to a higher demand for oxygen in the body when working at higher intensities compared to lower intensities. Because we are moving more oxygen, we're using more oxygen, there is less oxygen in the blood. Therefore, receptors notice this and send an impulse to the respiratory control center, which sends faster impulses to the intercostal and diaphragm muscles to make them contract faster and deeper in order to get more oxygen into the body to meet the demand. So from these results, we can make an estimate at ventilation for the multi-stage fitness test. At the beginning of the test, around level 2, is sub-maximal exercise. So we can take the normative value as shown in the previous slide for sub-maximal exercise and combine it with breathing rate to calculate the ventilation. So for level 2, the breathing rate was 28 beats per minute. If we multiply this with the normal value for tidal volume at sub-maximal exercise of 1500 milliliters, we can estimate a ventilation level of around 42 liters at level 2. For level 8, which is higher intensity, breathing rate was about 40 beats per minute. Well, sorry, not about, was 40 beats per minute. Multiplied with the normal value for tidal volume at maximal exercise, which was 3,500 milliliters. This gives us a estimated ventilation of 140 liters. So we can see the large difference between 42 liters and 140 liters between a sub-maximal exercise and maximal exercise, showing that the different demands in oxygen cause a higher ventilation rate. The second test we did was the Wingate test. During the Wingate test, there is higher intensity than the multi-stage fitness test, but for a shorter duration. We will still see the same anticipatory rise in breaths per minute before the exercise, as shown here. That's for the same reason as our body starts to prepare us with adrenaline. But as the test starts, there is a much steeper increase in breaths per minute due to a higher demand for oxygen caused by the higher intensity of the test, because it's a higher intensity right from the beginning, whereas the multi-stage fitness test builds its way up. So we can also use the results of this test to estimate the ventilation value at high and low intensities. At rest, the breathing rate was 14 breaths per minute. Multiply this by the normal resting tidal volume, which is 500 milliliters, gives us an estimated ventilation of around 7 liters per minute. And post-test, after the test, once we've been through it, so it should be high intensity, the breathing rate was 28 beats per minute, multiplied by the average tidal volume at maximal intensity, which is 3,500 milliliters. We can estimate then that ventilation is 98 liters per minute at the end of the high intensity period. So again, we can see the difference between a resting 7 liters per minute ventilation to the maximal 98 liters per minute ventilation caused by the demand in oxygen. And yeah, so applying this to sport, when a basketball player gets a rebound and dribbles the full length of the court to score a basket on the other end, their breathing rate will be high as they have just done a short burst of intense work, shown here. Their body will be high in the demand for oxygen, so they won't have as much oxygen in their body, so the breathing rate will increase to try and replace the oxygen and get rid of the built-up CO2 produced by the muscles. The increased breathing rate will increase the overall ventilation value, meaning they are breathing in a higher volume of air per minute. However, when a player gets back on defense and is sort of standing stationary and in a half-court set, the body is working at a relatively low intensity and is given time to rest. Therefore, the breathing rate will decrease as there isn't a high demand for oxygen, as not much is being used up by the low intensity exercise. As breathing rate decreases, the overall ventilation value will decrease as well, meaning they are breathing in low volume of air per minute. During exercise, the high demand for oxygen causes us to breathe quicker, but it also makes us breathe deeper in the attempt to breathe in more oxygen and breathe out more waste carbon dioxide. This is known as forced breathing. During inspiration, the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm muscles still contract. However, accessory muscles and pectoral minus muscles also contract, which pull the ribs further upwards and outwards than they would at rest. This increases the volume of lungs more than it would at rest, so the pressure decreases a lot more than the external environment. So more air rushes into the lungs to meet the demand for oxygen during exercise. Similarly, during expiration, when exercising, the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles still contract, but also the internal intercostal muscles and the abdominal muscles also contract, which pull the ribs further inwards and downwards, therefore decreasing the volume more than when at rest, so the pressure increases a lot more than atmospheric pressure. So more air is pushed out of the lungs during exercise than when at rest. Sort of touched on this earlier, but the control of breathing. So for the body to get rid of the built-up CO2 in the muscles and meet the demand of oxygen when exercising, chemoreceptors in the blood must detect changes. For example, a decrease in oxygen and an increase in CO2, which happens during exercise. These chemoreceptors send impulses to the respiratory control center, also known as the VRG. Within the VRG, there are expiratory and inspiratory centers. When inspiring, the expiratory center is inhibited and vice versa. The VRG sends impulses by motor neurons to the ventilatory muscles, i.e. the accessory muscles or the internal intercostal muscles, depending on whether we're inspiring or expiring. The impulses cause the muscles to contract, causing the person to breathe in and out heavier and deeper as a feedback response to get more oxygen in the body to get rid of wasted carbon dioxide when exercising. Yeah, so this is the control of when we are force breathing. The Herring-Brewer reflex is when stretch receptors in the lungs send impulses via the vagus nerve to the brain to terminate inspiration in order to prevent overexpansion of the lungs. So this is a protective action for the lungs. And lastly, there is the Valsalva maneuver. When multiple muscles contract, air pressure increases in the lungs. However, when the glottis is closed and there is nowhere for air to rush out, the air exerts a large force on the inside of the lungs and on the muscles. Our whole body tenses up, and there is nowhere for the air to leave out the body, and our muscles are still contracting. This is known as the Valsalva maneuver, and this is used for when bracing for contact. So, for example, when a player in basketball sets a screen on another player, the player braces for impact, they use the Valsalva maneuver to tense up, and it absorbs the impact, making it less damaging through contact. Also, another example is when weightlifters do heavy squats, as shown here. They tense up and their glottis closes, so the muscles tense up as they're going down in the squat. To generate this helps to generate power, so that they can push back up when they are using really heavy weights. Okay, thank you for listening.